and Param, which is on the very notion of what do we mean by recycling. Because when you look at the plastic life cycle, then a lot of it is about what can be recycled, how will it be recycled, and what can't be recycled, then how do we minimize and how do we get out of the value chain. Now, in our work, we have been looking at deconstructing the word recycling, trying to understand what of that material and that life cycle and the material cycle of the material, what of it is really possible to reuse? How would you reuse it? Who reuses it? What can be done better to improve the conditions of the people who reuse the material? Who collects it? How can their lifestyle, their livelihood be enjoined to the work that we are doing on plastic management? And then, of course, the big question about what is it that we mean by incineration, or what is called tertiary or other forms of plastic recycling, and what are the ways ahead? We'll also look at the EPR, and we have people here who work on this. So try and see where is it working, what can we do, and how do we make this more effective. One of our bugbears has been, and I need to put that right out to both of you, as both of you know us well, and I can say that is, for us, the question about what can't be recycled and can't be incinerated, how do we deal with it? How do we actually find out that that's a material that will need to be minimized or banned? And in that comes multi-layered plastic, which in city after city, and Linaji, tomorrow we are doing a consultation on behalf of the Ministry of Water Resources and Sanitation on the circularity question that the Prime Minister has asked. And CSE is hosting a consultation to discuss dry waste. And when you bring the city managers into the conversation, then their biggest challenge is really how do you deal with plastic, particularly where they do not have a disposal point. Now, more and more cities are getting to the point of asking for a zero landfill strategy, which is also part of the SBM 2.0. And that is a huge movement forward for a country like India. And I think it plays a huge role in setting the model for the rest of the world to say our cities will be zero landfill based. We will not treat waste as waste, but waste as a resource. We will do material reprocessing, and we will join livelihoods with it. But when we talk to city managers, they are still grappling with the problem of dry waste, particularly where they do not have sites for incineration. And that's really where cities are not close to a cement plant, for instance. So what do we do? So a lot of those questions we will discuss over this day today, and I hope that you will allow us to come back to both of you with more details of what we have found, the conversation we have here, and the conversation we will have tomorrow, where we will have also a lot of city managers joining us, as well as the community of recyclers, community of people working with EPR, with PRO, so that we can actually come up with a set of issues which we will put forward to JJM, which can then take it forward as part of your discussions on circularity, which you are doing with the chief secretaries at the end of the month. So I hope that that will really help us all. I mean, in my view, India has taken some very important first steps. And obviously the first steps have to lead to an evaluation of what's working, what isn't, and then take the next steps. And that's the purpose of this meeting. So once again, I'd really like to thank both of you for taking the time. And I'd like to invite my colleague, Siddharth, please come, Atin. Param, you know Atin, he worked with you at the bank as well. So he was telling me you were. So
I told Sanal already.
So if you could release the report, and then what I'd be grateful for is to hear from both of you before you both have to leave. Please come. Siddharth, come that side. Please come towards Linaji so that you can. Siddharth is the author of this report. So Correct. Thank you. Neena ji, if I may ask you for some few words. So good morning, Smita ji, and all those assembled here, as well as online. I think this report will certainly have some very interesting and useful aspects with respect to the entire life cycle of plastics. So, Smita ji has dwelt on several issues concerning plastics. Though they are an integral part of our lives, they are also responsible for problems that we face in our lives due to environmental pollution. And therefore, what is a solution and what is a problem become very closely interlinked when it comes to plastics in particular. India has been at the forefront in taking up issues concerning plastic, whether it is calling for, the whole single-use plastics ban. We were the ones to table the resolution in the UNIA in 2019, and this year, again, we played a very key role in the UN Environment Assembly early on in March of this year, where we discussed the need to have differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities at the core of the strategy, which means that all of us acknowledge the problem that plastics pose to the environment and to human health, but at the same time, there has to be a pragmatic approach in terms of resolving the issues depending upon the various dimensions of the stakeholders that are involved. Because we have those who are manufacturing the plastic, the MSMEs who are using this plastic to package and sell their products, the consumers, and ultimately all of us as trustees of the environment, and therefore our responsibility towards Mother Earth and what role we can play in that sense. So there are a whole gamut of activities that are involved when it comes to tackling the issue of plastics pollution, and I'm sure that this report will show, will throw up some interesting recommendations insofar as the standards go. So can we develop certain standards and mandatory standards for plastics? How do we deal with them through this reduce, reuse, recycle, virtuous circle that we are developing in the circular economy principles? And what is it that ultimately should go for end of life and should not be destined to a landfill, given the problems that we are facing in having landfills and the problems that landfills themselves create when it comes to soil and water pollution? So therefore, there are some very, let us say, complex issues involved, but at the same time, it is not to say that complex issues cannot be addressed if we have a kind of a holistic approach, which is not only whole of government, but also whole of society. Because all of us as individuals, as in our individual and collective capacities, we also have a very important role to play. And therefore, I'm sure that under Smita ji's able guidance, CSE will also play a leading role when it comes to sensitizing people about disposal of plastic, having more citizen involvement, taking the message across the length and breadth of our country, so that all individuals, all Indians recognize that they also have a role to play, and only then will we be able to effectively address the issue. Thank you for inviting me here, and also for this report, which I'm sure a lot of effort and labor has gone into it, and we look forward to examining it in greater detail and getting the inputs from you on the circular economy discussions that you just mentioned. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Neena. Thank you, Neena. That's very encouraging, and we will look forward to our further engagement with you on these issues. Param, please.
Good morning to all of you, and thanks to Neeta for inviting me. In terms of the sort of challenge of plastic and the complexities issue, I think Neena has spoken to them very well in terms of the entire plastic life cycle. With this report, I was glancing through it and not to go through it in more detail. So I think Neena has sort of covered the gamut of issues. I wanted to talk about 2 or 3 areas, and it would be good to follow up again on that as Neena mentioned. The first is in terms of the management of this, or how do you want to put it, the governance of plastic management. I think at the municipal level is going to be key, right? As you've highlighted in this report. Because while plastic is primarily an urban issue, although increasingly getting into peri-urban and rural as well. And as you mentioned, SBM 2.0, which is something which the cabinet approved in 19, is looking now at a broader definition of Swachhata, looking at solid and liquid waste. And as we know, solid waste is pretty much mainly plastic to a large extent, both urban and rural. So I think they're addressing it there as well. But the core of it is going to be at the municipal level. And therefore, that's, you said you're going to get some city managers tomorrow. It'll be interesting to hear them. We're all stuck in our work, but it'll be good to get feedback.
Yes.
In terms of how do you actually manage this on the ground. Many cities have tried to address it. Whether you talk about Indore, Bhopal, or Mysore, there are many cities. Pune, the ones which we have heard of, but there should be many others at different levels. So I think the whole management of the plastic waste cycle, whether we're talking of cities becoming zero landfill, or how do we get, what is the management of this? Because the science of this is now pretty much well known. The evidence in terms of how plastic lasts for a million years. We've spoken about eliminating SUP. So the science, the policy seems to be sort of on track. I think where we need to focus on is the management of plastic and how do we involve all segments of society, whether it's the administration of the municipal commissioner, but I don't know what the term for the rag pickers are, but the people who actually pick up the waste, the users of how SUP is discarded, but the heavier plastic waste are collected and recycled and all that. So I think there's a whole ecosystem. So all the stakeholders in plastic, ultimately, if you bring it down to a municipal level, how do you manage it? I think that's critical. That's one point. The second point I wanted to mention is, what Lena already touched upon, which is the involvement of people. And this is also about behavior change, right? All programs pretty much, as the Prime Minister has been emphasizing, is about how do you mainstream the appropriate behavior in these different programs. So plastic, are people segregating? Now, and stopping to use SUP. Now, obviously, it's a complex problem, as Lina mentioned. You can't suddenly shut it down because what are the alternatives? MSME, livelihoods, a lot of things are involved. But at the core of it, I would say, is behavior. How do you influence that behavior? How do people understand the challenges of plastic management? How do you communicate that? And I think there's a major role for all of us, but certainly at the municipal level. And what are the key messages? Scientific messages, so that because there are many myths around plastic, like there are myths about many other things. So I think programming appropriate communication around plastic is going to be fundamental to any method to manage the whole plastic life cycle. So there, I'm sure CSE has done a lot of work, but in the end, it comes down to some simple messages appropriately communicated, which resonate, which can trigger the term we use in Swat Bharat, which can trigger further movement. So I think that's going to be very, very important because everything else is important, but unless it gets mainstream, people understand the importance of it in their daily lives, it cannot become a mass movement, which it does. And finally, related to that is, this program that the Prime Minister has been promoting called Lifestyle for the Environment. And plastic waste management is at the core of that. It's all about what individuals and communities can do. So it's not about, the policy, the science, and so Lina and the Ministry of Environment and Forests and Climate Change are leading this now. And there was a successful event at COP as well. But the Prime Minister launched it with the UNSG on 20th of October. So this program is about what all of us can do. It's not about what they can do, it's what we can do. And this in turn will trigger, so demand will trigger supply. And so therefore, if people get their act together on simple and climate friendly, environmentally friendly actions, including plastic management, at the individual household community level, it's going to trigger a market response. So the supply response will be triggered by demand, and then the policy will follow. So that's the way we see it. And hopefully, now this movement needs to spread. Nina and team are leading this, and we are working with them. But I think that's another important part of this whole debate. So once again, thanks for inviting me. Sorry, both of us have got to leave very soon, but hopefully we can follow up with you and look forward to the conclusions of this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Veena. I mean, you both in few words have really put down what I think are the key challenges as we move forward. And we will definitely keep this conversation going, and we will, my colleague Atin, Siddharth and the team, we will come and see you and discuss this further with you. I mean, essentially what we are finding in just a few words is we are finding that there are amazing work happening at the city level. And Param, we'll come and see you on it, but we did a report for NITI last year where we brought together the best practices in each area of municipal solid waste from a city perspective. And we essentially found that cities were really working very hard and doing some really important and good work in terms of solid waste management, which includes, as you very correctly have said, plastic is the biggest bugbear there. I mean, once you segregate your wet waste, there are solutions for. But it's the dry waste and the segregation of dry waste and then the recycling and safe disposal of the dry waste. That's a challenge for cities. But there is some really interesting work happening at the city level. And one of our efforts will be to try, and this is the report that we did for with NITI last year, putting together these best practices. We also did a series of films on the best practices from city level, here learning from the city managers themselves. And the effort has been now to find where are the obstacles that they are finding. And you're very right, Param, the management and the involvement of recyclers, the informal sector, and really finding out what is it that cannot be recycled and how is the safe disposal going to be possible. That's part of one of the challenges. But combined with that, and I think Honorable Prime Minister's effort to really highlight the issue of life really brings home the message that it's all connected to us. And that it's we who will have to make the changes. And so education, awareness, and bringing policy and practice together from that perspective is key. So again, thank you very much for coming. And we know that you both have this important meeting to go to. We will continue, if you forgive me, I won't come and see you out. My colleagues will. And we are not going to take a break. We will continue.
Thanks,
and Veena, I'm going to ask Amit. Yes, Amit, if you can come up with us, please.
Thanks. We'll see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jagdish, will you sit down?
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, we're going to continue on the meeting.
Okay. Welcome again to all of you and to all the participants who have joined us virtually. There are more than 500 of them connected. So taking the proceedings ahead, if I may request my Director General Sunita ji to set the context for this workshop before we move ahead with the other agenda. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Atin. And again, sorry for this break, but we got a call. They were informed only yesterday about the change, and there's a meeting at CAPSEC, so there's very little I can do or they can do. So we did this jugaad, as they say, for them to come and share a few words before we go down to real business. And Amit is here with us. Amit Love is from the Ministry of Environment and Forests and he's an old friend, but he's also somebody who has now been instrumental in putting together a lot of the policies there. So we look forward to learning from him on what's happening. So today's meeting, and Atin, if you and Siddharth can join me here as well, that would be good. Today's meeting that CSE is organizing is really about trying to understand, as we're saying, the life cycle of plastic. Now, we all know what are the problems with plastic waste, and I don't think I need to get into any detail on that. And to a community like this, the problems that we face, the fact that it has become one of humankind's most necessary item, but also the biggest sign of the anthropogenic mess we are leaving behind. I keep saying that when I'm traveling anywhere in India, the sign of humanity is a sign of plastic waste. I mean, it's literally become a sign of what we're going to leave behind for the next generation. Is going to be, they will remember us when somebody writes the history of this epoch in humankind. They're going to say, this was the generation of plastic waste. And that really has become one of the issues which is central to us today, and to find solutions for it. Now, the reason Amit is an old friend is that he also did a lot of work on ozone. And interestingly, to me, the ozone issue and the plastic issue is very related, because they're both products that have been made by humankind as indestructible products. That these products are really permanent products, and they were made, it's like DDT. There are three such things that, if you think about it from an environmental perspective, three things that we as human beings have, or science has created, saying, well, this is a magic product. Why? Because it cannot get destroyed. That's what happened with DDT and the long-lasting chemicals that were found when it came to pesticide. It doesn't degrade in the environment. And that is why it then became a part of the environmental menace story, where you were finding DDT contamination from bird to eggshell to human beings to land. Basically, it's a product that can't be destroyed. CFCs, when they were launched, were seen as products which were a miracle of science, because these were chemicals which could not be destroyed. And then we found that, look what happened to the ozone layer, and look what it has done to the fact that we actually had chemicals which could go and impact something like the ozone layer. And that's not the stratospheric layer, the top layer. And now we have plastics. Plastics have been products which we all have. It's everywhere, they're everywhere, but they're also there because they cannot be destroyed. And that's why they're also so useful. When every time you get rid of plastic, people say it's the alternative. Where is the alternative? Because I need plastics to carry my fish home because my bag won't leak. I need plastics to have a straw because it won't leak. So it's part of everyday life today. And how much of it is part of everyday life? Now, in the efforts to handle plastic and to manage plastic, there have been essentially two strategies that have been used. Three, if you look at it. One has been to try and eliminate products which are today defined as single-use plastic, which has been a very important measure taken by the Ministry of Environment and Forests to try and actually just say these are not there at all. These are eliminated. Now, that's difficult, and I know, and I'm sure if Amit will tell us how difficult it has been to actually do that step, because there are vested interests, as simple as that, but there are also the fact that many of them don't have alternatives. And so it's a combination of both the vested interests, but also the human need that we don't have. The other has been to say, let's collect and let's recycle. That's been the second big effort in plastic management. Now, this is where CSE's entire, if you may say, obsession has been over the last year. We want to deconstruct the word recycling. And the reason I have said this to my colleague Siddharth, I've really been, I hope he's enjoying the work that he's doing, but I've really been bugging him on this, is because I don't know how many of you have been to Tikri. How many of you have been to Tikri? Okay. It's some place which is not difficult to go to. You take a metro and you go straight to Tikri, which is it takes you to the Tikri, Asia's largest plastic market, which is at the doorstep, not the doorstep, but at the edge of Delhi. It's from Delhi to Haryana.
It's something that everyone who works on plastics should visit. Because when you visit it, you really understand the life cycle of plastic, which finds its way to this largest market, plastic market of Asia. It's not even India, it's Asia's largest plastic market. It's in Delhi. If you go there, you will find how carefully every product is segregated, separated, and then you also find the number of products that have no use. And then you find whereas the life cycle of that recycling product. Now, that's something we will continue to do more work to look at different products in terms of the life cycle. After you go to Tikri, the other place that every one of you must visit is a place called Bhavana. How many of you have been to Bhavana? No, you live in Delhi, I haven't been to Bhavana. Okay, you should, whoever doesn't live in Delhi, I forgive you, for the rest I don't, okay? Okay, so then I'm fine, then I forgive you, the rest I don't forgive.
I've been there.
Okay, so please go to Bhavana and go and see the factories that work inside to do what you mean by plastic recycling. Okay? How that plastic in different types is separated by the factories, how that plastic is washed, how it is melted, how it is made pellets into, and how then it is resold as recycling. Now, for most of us middle class environmentalists, we would go there and say, oh, such terrible working conditions. But we middle class environmentalists forget that we are the responsible for the plastic waste which has to be recycled in those terrible working conditions by the people who live and work in Bhavana. And the factory owners in Bhavana will tell you how they are harassed and persecuted by every pollution control board and by every management to say these are bad working conditions. But we do not have any other way that recycling happens. The only other way that we know that recycling happens is when the plastic is segregated, put together, it is compacted, bundled up, and then it is sent to incineration. And that incineration happens largely in cement plants. Now, what do you do with a city which doesn't have a cement plant next to it? Atin, Siddharth, and I had the good fortune or bad fortune to go and see Agra. Okay? If you go and see a PRO in Agra, they will tell you their biggest problem is where do they send the material and who will pay for the transport of that material when there are long distances to carry. So these are real questions and we have to discuss them. We have to discuss and deconstruct that life cycle of plastic so that we can come up with more nuanced strategies to move forward. And that's really that is the effort that we are making today. So let me invite my colleague Siddharth, who has put together this excellent report to give us a presentation on some of the key findings. And then what I'm going to do, Siddharth, is post this, because we have a little time, I'm going to ask Amit to make some comments and I'm going to open up the floor. Questions, discussion. Then we will break for tea and then we will break back into the session that we have posted. Siddharth, please.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Okay. So, thank you.
Share it on the screen because a lot of people watching you.
Okay.
So Sukanya, was the rest visible as well? Leena ji, Param ji, I'm not so savvy about these technologies.
Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. A lot of you have come here when I've personally spoken to you, and a lot of you have also added a lot of value to this report that we have released today. So I'll just quickly run through some of the key findings that we came across while we were working on this report. And what we tried to do in this report was to understand the sources, the fates, and the channels. So where does plastic come from? How does it flow in the entire ecosystem? And then eventually, where does it land up, right? So we started off with the petrochemical industry, which essentially is the very basic source of plastics. So there's some things that I want to share with you regarding.
I think the sound is on.
Sound. I need to use this.
Okay. So, like we all know, almost 99% of the plastics that we use today are derived from fossil fuels, right? And apart from that, if you look at the figure that you can see on the screen, almost 75% of the plastics are sourced by private players in the entire market, right? So of the total 29.1 million metric tons uh, of petrochemicals that are manufactured in the country, close to 67% of this is just used to manufacture polymers or plastics, right? So we are right now, we are producing, the latest figure that we have is around 18.5 million metric tons of plastic being produced in the country. And that is derived from this petrochemical industry. Now, overall, if you actually look at it, between 2005 and 2019, our plastic production has increased by over 2.5 times. Our plastic consumption has increased by almost 2 times, and the imports, which basically is how this petrochemical industry functions, is by importing a lot of crude oil. The imports have gone up by 4 times, right? And what we do here in India is essentially import the raw material, manufacture the plastic, and then either use it domestically or send it abroad. Now, India is positioning itself to kind of become a major exporter in the plastic or basic petrochemical space, and it plans to increase exports by over 100% by the year 25-26. Now, the remaining 1%, so 99% is sourced from the petrochemical industries. The remaining 1% is sourced from bio-based sources, which basically is the biodegradable and compostable plastic industry. And the government is currently looking at compostable and biodegradable plastic as an alternative to the problematic plastic or to the single-use plastic that we have in the country. Although the worry might be that we may have slightly oversimplified the entire issue of biodegradable and compostable. Because if you actually look at this figure, it tells you that even when plastics are made from fossil-based fuels, there is a possibility that they might be biodegradable. But even if plastics are made from bio-based sources, there is a likelihood that they can not be biodegradable at all, right? And we don't really have numbers. The last number that we have from CPCB is from the year 2007-8, and which says that close to 100,000 tons of compostable and biodegradable plastic is being placed on the Indian market. But if we look at the global trend, we see that there is a shift, that even biodegradable and compostable plastics today are actually non-biodegradable, right? And the share of biodegradable plastics overall is come down by 7% in just 1 year period, right? So this is something that it is definitely can be considered as a potential way forward, but we have to tread this path very carefully after considering a lot of issues that have arisen. It's all there in the report, but to be very specific, I would point out that there is a demand or there is a need for labeling of biodegradable and compostable plastic, because even the standards that we have, the latest standards that came in the year 2021, have said that there has to be a clear labeling on any compostable plastic, which should specify that this particular plastic is not suitable for home composting, or this particular plastic has to be sent to an industrial composting setup. But that is not happening in the Indian market. Most of the plastic, the compostable plastic that we receive today does not specifically mention that you can't really compost this plastic at home, and it has to be sent to an industrial composting center. Now, how many industrial composting centers do we have in the country? That is the next question that comes to mind. And even if we kind of be optimistic and say that, okay, let's send all the compostable plastic to this industrial composting center, then we need to devise a separate collection mechanism altogether, because your compostable plastic cannot go with your conventional plastic. And we also met a few recyclers who kind of claimed that when compostable plastic is mixed with conventional plastic, a potentially recyclable batch might get destroyed because of that contamination. So these are some issues that came out of the biodegradable and the compostable plastic industry. Now, moving forward, we have this landscape. It is developed by Nandini's team, CII, and it basically gives a very clear picture of how the plastic comes from the resin producer, and then how does it flow across the different stakeholders, right? So we have the resin producers, and then in between we have converters, right? What converters do is they take orders from brand owners and manufacturers, and they take resins from the petrochemical companies, and based on the need, the demand, they manufacture the plastic and supply it to the brand owners. Now, what we need to understand is that the space that we are talking about, the space where we are talking about the converters, is a very complicated web of both formal and informal players, right? So from a formal value chain of resin production, your plastic is coming into a web of formal and informal players, and then it is again going back into the formal system, right? And then it reaches the consumer through the retailers, and eventually the consumer basically discards it, and then it enters into a system where we have a parallel formal and an informal sector that is operating, right? And most of what we do currently, even today, as of now, as we speak, happens mostly in the informal space, right? So some numbers that we could find is more than 37% of all the petrochemical production that is happening in the country, of all the petrochemical production happening in the country, 37% is just used for product packaging applications. And packaging applications are essentially things that we don't buy the package, right? We buy the product which is packaged in the plastic, and then we don't need the package anymore. So essentially it is a single-use plastic that we're talking about, right? So 37%, that's a very huge number if we talk about how much of products that we are using when it comes to the mean service life. So the mean service life of the packaging product is very low. It varies between minutes. It can go up to maybe weeks or max months, right? The other issues that we have is we don't really have any plastic footprint that our producers or importers or brand owners who put their product on the market. We don't really have a lot of numbers. Only 3 PBOs, or producer, importers, brand owners, have actually listed in the public domain that this is how much we are producing every year. And last year, something very interesting happened. Close to 3 different companies have self-declared themselves as plastic neutral. Now, this is a very this is a trend that is observed right when EPR was about to be kind of notified in the Indian legislative system. Now, the issue is that we don't really have a mechanism in the system to verify the claims, both regarding the plastic footprint and regarding the plastic neutrality. And plastic neutrality is something that, as a consumer, when you're told that, look, this company is plastic neutral, and if you're a conscious consumer, you kind of get inclined towards that particular producer. But we don't really understand how did they arrive at that number, right? Plastic neutral means that this company has collected what it had put on the market, but it does not mean that they have recycled everything that they've collected. right? And we will also try and understand why recycling almost everything that you've collected is practically not possible. We'll try and understand that in the upcoming slides. Now, between the people who are putting products on the market and the consumers, there is a very important piece of stakeholder, or it's kind of a missing part of the puzzle, as I can say. And in 2016, there was an attempt to integrate the retailers into the legislative value chain, wherein the whole arrangement was that every retailer will pay a certain amount to the local government, and then these funds will be utilized for waste management. Right? But that did not work out. And in the 2018 amendment that happened, basically this clause was removed in entirety. And right now, these retailers are kind of a stakeholder, which, if put to work in the right manner, can actually help us to set up reverse logistics system. So I'm sure all of you might remember, not long back, I think 15-20 years back, we had a very good reverse mechanism or reverse logistics system which was working in the country.
So that not when you were around. Okay, when I was around. Okay, let's get that generation shift right. Okay, when Amit and I were around, we definitely took our bottles back.
Right.
For the bottle. Okay.
Right. So when I was a small child, I did see this in action. So it has happened in my lifetime as well. But then eventually from there it faded away, right? So what I want to kind of put across through this slide is more than 40 different countries across the globe have instituted some kind of a deposit refund scheme where packaging is now being made for refilling has targets for reuse and refill. So this is some place where we can deliberate, we can sit and actually kind of institute how do we move about. What we have done in the report is we have proposed a DRS mechanism for the country, where we have tried to incorporate every stakeholder that is operational today in the entire value chain. So we have the informal sector, we have waste management agencies and PROs, we have our recyclers, we have obviously the PBOs, retailers, and also the consumers. So this is something that we've proposed in the report on how we should now kind of bring back that system of reverse logistics. Apart from that, when we come to consumers, we did a small survey where we released, we shared, we have a very huge or a very effective media team, outreach team. So we use that channel to reach out to people, and we had designed a questionnaire, and we had asked very simple questions to consumers, depending on what their perception is with respect to plastics. And we got some responses which were like close to 76% were willing to pay extra for any kind of alternatives that is made available. 50% feel that plastic is being imposed on them. Almost 67%, or rather 70%, are either not happy with the kind of packaging they're receiving, or they think that plastics that we are using are very difficult to recycle. And when it comes to the practices that are followed by consumers, less than 50% actually segregate their waste. And actual segregation, so close to 20% are also throwing their plastic in the mixed waste bins. So here we also kind of understand that the consumer also needs to upgrade their practices when it comes to how we are disposing of our plastic waste. Now, the overall objective or the understanding that we got is the packaging options are not really driven by the consumer demand, but they are rather driven by how the PBO basically is looking at the entire ecosystem and what is the economic interest of the people who are putting the packaging product on the market. Now, for the informal sector, to understand the informal sector, we visited Mumbai, we visited Pune, where we had interactions with members of the cooperative members of Swachh and KKPKP. So in total, there were around 10 to 12 different informal sector with whom this conversation was done. And what we found was close to, so basically the conversation revolved around how much of minimum quality and quantity of plastic waste or other waste are they collecting. So what was the minimum quantity in a day and what was the maximum quantity in a day. What we found out is close to 50% of everything that the informal sector collects is plastic, right? More than 50%, in fact. The rest being paper, glass, metal. Now, if you actually look at these two categories, that is mix main and RS, these two are categories which roughly add up to around 40%. And the informal sector workers also informed me that these are material that do not have any forward linkages, which means that people are not really willing to buy these kind of waste, right? Which means that they have to store it at their place. That eventually adds up to the direct or the indirect cost being bared by the workers. And these are some examples, some pictures of what they shared with me that they were finding difficult to kind of sell it away to, right? So what you see on your left is the multi-layer packaging. What you see on the right is what they call locally RS, but it's essentially paper with a plastic film. It does not have any buyers in the market. And what you see in the middle is a very interesting mix of something that both in Mumbai and Pune was confirmed by the workers. These kind of material, despite being made up of PET, are not being taken away by any recycler, right? So there's a lot of different kinds of plastic waste that do not have a market, and even if we collect them, we can't really have a choice to send it to a recycling plant because there are no buyers for these kind of products. Now this was done at Mumbai. So basically, it's a material recovery facility which is operated jointly by the local government in Mumbai and by a waste cooperative society. So of all the plastic waste that was received at the MRF over a period of 1 week, anything between 42 to 86% was contributed by the informal sector. So even if we say that we are able to collect a lot of plastic, the informal sector has a very critical role to play when it comes to collection and channelization to the relevant places from where it can then be channelized for recycling. Other aspect that we basically have to focus on, that this particular MRF had a reject rate of close to 33%, which means everything that they were collected, only 66% was being sent ahead for either recycling or for end of life disposal. The rest was basically sent to landfills or dump sites. Another interesting thing that we basically found out through these people is that although there is a mandate from the government and even from the donors of this particular society that you have to sell your plastic waste to authorized recyclers, only 30 to 40% of what they were able to collect was being channelized to authorized recycling facilities because of the demand. The rest 60 to 70% had to be given away to an informal aggregator, because there's a demand in the informal space for a lot of materials that do not have a demand in the formal space. That's one. And then another interesting thing that we found out was when this MRF or this cooperative goes to a formal registered recycler to say that see, this is the amount of waste that I have, and I need you to recycle this and give me an EPR certificate in return. The authorized recycler bargains on the price, the market price of the plastic, in return of an EPR certificate, which is kind of a mandate right now according to the Indian legislative system. So so this is how basically so the understated message is, where is my cut? If you are making profit from the EPR certificate that you are going to submit to the PIBO, where is my cut in that? So that's why I will pay you maybe 5 rupees or 10 rupees less than what the actual market rate is. So this brings us to the issue of the politics of recycling, right? So we've all been told that see, plastic is not a problem. It's not a material production problem. Everything can be recycled, so on and so forth. But if you actually look at it, almost more than 100, 200 cities in the country right now are going through a process of biomining, which is also a mandate under the Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0. And the amount of plastic or the SCF or the RDF that is being generated from these dump sites is humongous. And we conduct trainings every month in our training institute, which is Anil Agarwal Environmental Training Institute. We have people from local governments who come to us and tell that, we have 10 tons of multi-layer packaging lying in our backyard in our MRF, but nobody is really willing to buy it. We're even ready to transport it, but then we don't really have a cement co-processing plant around us. So these are issues that we need to understand with respect to what really can be recycled, what is actually being recycled, and where is the demand for what kind of plastic, right? So definitely what something that has value in the market will instantly get picked up and sent to either a formal or an informal recycling value chain. But there are a lot of things that do not have the value. So collecting, transporting, and actually recycling will cost you a lot more than actually making it fresh from virgin material. Right. So we need to kind of understand what these plastic items are, and then try and deliberate on how do we move ahead on these kind of plastics, right? Okay, next slide. Yeah. Let me try again.
And it has this now.
Yeah, sure. So
Next.
yeah. So like ma'am was talking in the morning, basically we need to deconstruct and we need to understand what essentially do we mean when we say recycling. Is it making pellets out of something that has been manufactured in the past? Is it transporting them to a co-processing plant? Does it mean building roads out of it, right? So as per CPCB, and also this is a universally accepted definition, there are 4 different types of recycling, right? So if I run you through with examples, so primary recycling, you will take a bottle, you make a bottle out of it. Secondary recycling is you take a bottle, you make maybe fiber or t-shirt out of it. Tertiary recycling is you take a bottle and you make fuel out of it. And quaternary recycling is you take that bottle and you recover the embedded energy of the bottle and you use that energy, right? But if we go by the order of preference, primary recycling should be given the highest preference, and quaternary recycling should be given the lowest amount of preference, right? What's happening currently in the country is a lot of secondary recycling. So we are taking a lot of stuff, we are mechanically recycling it. This is what the mechanical process basically consists of. You take the plastic waste, you segregate it. So segregation can happen on a lot of aspects. So polymer type, your color, right, the density, everything, right? So what you see here is what you see in the middle is basically flaked plastics, which are sorted according to the color. And then you basically melt it, pass it through a sieve to get spools. And then those spools are cut to get pellets. These pellets can be remelted, remolded to make new products out of it. This is essentially what mechanical recycling means, right? And this is what secondary recycling is, and it is happening at scale in the country, both in the formal and in the informal space. Now, to understand what is the extent of recycling in the country, we analyze the data that Central Pollution Control Board has shared in its latest annual report, 2019-20. And this report is basically a compilation of all the data that the state pollution control boards and the pollution control committees have submitted to the Central Pollution Control Board. Now, after we did a careful analysis of, depending on how many states had submitted data, how many states had submitted data around primary and secondary recycling that they were doing, how many states were more into tertiary and quaternary recycling. So the numbers that basically came out is we are currently recycling, as per this report, we are currently recycling close to 32%. So including all primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, everything 32%. But mechanical recycling is happening only at a rate of 12.3%. And if you actually look at the report, most of the states and cities have listed in their best practices that we are sending away our plastic waste to a cement plant that is 200 kilometers away to kind of co-process it. Right? So that is the best practice. So 32% is what the analysis says is we are processing plastic. Of that, only 12.3% is what we are able to mechanically recycle. The rest we are sending away for burning applications or for road making and other applications, end of life disposal. Now, another thing that we found is two major recyclers in the country. So I won't name them, it's there in the report, you can have a look at it. But one of the recyclers that claims to be the biggest recycler in India collected 100,000 tons of plastic waste, and they were only able to recycle 30,000 tons mechanically. The rest 70,000 tons was sent for end of life disposal to cement plants or for road making or for other end of life disposal. And this is not just the case with the biggest recycler in India, but also the next in line basically was only able to mechanically recycle 40% of the plastic waste that they collected. The rest 60% was chemically recycled. So they are trying to make fuel out of it. So that's the status of how much and what approaches are we taking towards recycling. Now, just to sum up, the report suggests three kinds of actions: short-term actions, which have to be taken in maybe this year or next year. Then there are midterm actions and long-term actions, which can be thought upon as we move ahead from here. So we definitely need to inventorize. We need to inventorize how many PBOs do we have, how much are they actually putting on the market, right? We need to verify any claim that any PBO is making with respect to this is the amount, this is the plastic footprint that I have, right? We need to inventorize how many recyclers we have in the country, what kind of approach are they taking to recycle plastic waste, right? And also obviously collect credible data. We have a live EPR portal which was released by the Honorable Environment Minister. And that portal, we've been following it, and it has been updated time and again. It has a lot of data, but I think we don't really know how many PBOs should we actually expect to register on the portal, right? The second point is we have to monitor biodegradable and compostable. We shouldn't take it to a scale where it becomes more of a challenge to kind of tackle it than a solution. There has to be some kind of mandatory or proactive disclosure by PBOs, and there should be means to verify the disclosures that PBOs are doing. There has to be labeling mechanism. So even the recycling symbol that we see on our plastics is not essentially a recycling symbol. We call it the recycling symbol, but having a recycling symbol at the back of your plastic packaging does not mean that it can be recycled, right? So essentially, it is about communication to the consumer, right? So what are we trying to communicate to the consumer? And this also holds true for the compostable plastics that we are now starting to use. There's no doubt about involvement of informal sector. We are not calling it formalization of informal sector. We are calling it involvement, and we are doing it purposefully. The EPR system is something that now needs to be rationalized. We need to understand how many PPOs do we have. And I was just having a look at the portal the other day. Even for category 1 plastic, that is rigid plastic, cement plants have registered themselves as processors of rigid plastic. So there's a lot of ambiguity and gray areas that exist, which need to be thought upon, and then we have to move ahead from here. Obviously, refillable, reusable models, what we had in the past, need to be brought back. And then the biggest agenda that we have is to ban multi-layer plastic, because we know that these plastics cannot be recycled, although you can make boards out of it and you can make other things out of it, but it is kind of a forced market that we are creating, right? We don't really have a market for boards made out of plastic, but we are making shelter for poor people. Would you want to live in a house that is made out of plastic, is my question to you, right? And then this was on the agenda in the 2016 rules, but it was removed, and it was rather amended with certain specific additions or changes in text. And then from then on, since 2018, nobody has really talked about this issue. Medium-term actions have to be where the producers, importers, and brand owners have to now think about instituting design changes in the products or the packaging products that they are putting out in the market, so that they can be either recycled mechanically or they can be reused or refilled. We have to encourage R&D, and then the long-term choices. We have proposed a DRS system for India, and I would like to close with, we have to match our environmental choices with our economic choices, and that is the only way ahead from here. So on that note, I would thank you so much.
That was very well done and very comprehensive. I will now ask Amit, with your experience, issues that you would like to flag, issues that you would like us to think of, and then I will open up the floor for questions and issues.
Very good. So clear.
So good morning, everybody. And at the outset, I should thank Sunita ma'am for giving me this opportunity to sit with her. And that, of course, that's not but it's an acknowledgement of the kind of work she has always done. And I don't have much to speak because we had CEO Niti Aayog speaking, we have our secretary speaking, and Madam, highlight certain issues. And then, of course, we had a very detailed presentation. So I should, of course, congratulate the author for a very detailed and comprehensive presentation. And also the report, I've not seen the report in greater detail, but yes, the presentation was pretty comprehensive. So I will start by giving certain general comments. Pam talked about this epoch being the one where humans have dominated. So just because we have CSE, it's a think tank. Science has published a paper just recently in the most recent issues. 15 indicators have been identified to recognize Anthropocene. So you can, so you can actually see those parameters and then recognize. And they have also looked at certain locations which would now be become type locations to monitor how we are progressing in it. Plastics, of course, is one of them. So that's one. Then I would like to say an important, caveat. There is no silver bullet of how we deal with plastics. Neither it is available with India nor it is available globally. What our secretary said is actually the most important key message. It is that it is not whole of government, neither whole of international government, which is basically the UN system, but it is the whole of society. which needs to come in to look into the aspects of how we manage our plastic waste. Madam talked about, very interesting things. 3 chemicals which, have changed how humans as a civilization live. CSE was one of them. Polymers were other. Then she talked about. I should tell one more. It is urea. CONH2. It is basically driving our whole agricultural revolution. So the important part is that we have internalized the use of these synthetic chemicals because they, very important properties. One of them being urea, of course, is to be excluded here. Is that they are basically indestructible and they are amenable to machining. You can make different kinds of products out of them. And then we also need to recognize that as a society, we have moved towards more of ease. And so ease of use and ease of consuming. And plastics is a material which allows itself to be machined and to be made into different kind of uses. So we need to recognize that. And if we have to move away from plastics, it is the society which has a very important role. CEO Niti Aayog also, talked about that we need to have a very important thing we need to look at is how we communicate with our stakeholders and how we can have simple messages which need to be communicated appropriately in order to trigger a cascading response. And we talked about the LIFE campaign and how individual and collective action under the LIFE campaign can basically spur the market, spur the businesses to change the way they are doing things. However, Siddharth in his presentation said a very interesting slide on the questionnaire that the people feel that the packaging is thrust upon them. So it is not an individual choice which is driving the market, but it is the choice taken by CEOs and the packaging industry which is driving it. So be that as it may, we need to also recognize one more important factor, that all of us are players in an economic market, and in an economic market, if it doesn't have inefficiencies, we don't have any perfect market, you have a rational consumer. Rational consumer can drive the market. So basically, the policy intervention should be to remove the imperfections of the market, so that a rational consumer can drive the market the way it has to be. So that's an important point I would like to state. And now I will, so basically, most of what we have been doing in the last 2-3 years, and starting from 2016, more focused in the last 2-3 years, is to basically provide a policy mechanism under which actions can be taken by rational consumers and rational entities in economic framework. So our EPR is basically that. So as ma'am said, we have banned those items which we believe cannot be managed. They are littered, and many of those are found in our waste stream. So those have been banned since 1st of July. And now what I will try to do is, ma'am, if you just give me 5 minutes, overarchingly, I will touch on 2-3 things. So compostable plastics and biodegradable plastics, I'll come on that. So where are they and from where they are coming? Again, as the case is, these both materials are coming from outside India. So the rules have to provide a framework under which they can operate in a very precise way so that checks and balances can be put in place. So our rules provide for that, and of course the definitions between the two is clear. But yes, they need to be further strengthened. We can have a better labeling mechanism which can operate. And so that is one. So basically the rules don't say they are alternatives, but they provide a regulatory space for them to operate. What is an alternative? The government has not decided upon that as a conscious choice. We had an expo in Chennai where around 150 startups and MSMEs were there. They were basically working on eco alternatives, which basically I'm talking about many natural materials, agri residues, seaweeds, etc. We had a hackathon to look into alternative materials. So that is also there in terms of the space which we are looking at. What I would like to do is talk about one more point. I am not going to respond on many things, but important slide which Siddharth said was, what is the cost of recycling? So if you see, the cost of recycling is right in saying that the cost of recycling is far more than the cost of virgin material. So what is EPR? The Indian EPR. The Indian EPR is the market mechanism of providing BGF for recycling. So the Indian EPR does what is known as the viability gap funding for the development of waste recycling market. It is tempered by the market itself. So you have, and now here we have to also keep one thing in mind. It is the origin of EPR. We have Pranshul Singhal here. He has worked with the person who enunciated this principle. So the most simple thing everybody will say is tax the petrochemical industry and get over with it. But what is EPR? EPR is a mechanism of making the people responsible for their choices and move towards sustainability. And in that process, provide the funding which is required for the recycling infrastructure. So that's what it is. So it is right, the cost of recycling is high. EPR mechanism of India is in a way a VGF to allow for that to come. So what I do is I stop at that, and I would also not go into detail because we are trying to we have to finish by 11:10, another 2-3 minutes. What I would do is I would just try to talk on the actions which were shown in the slides. I think so nobody can deny the importance of credible data. And what has happened is through this EPR mechanism which we have brought in for plastics, and now of course it's also in 3 other waste streams. Others are to follow. Waste tire is there, e-waste is there, battery waste is there. You would find all information of the PIBOs or the obligated entities on the website of CPCB. Of course, as I told, there's no silver bullet, there's no final answer. But everybody can now see what are the EPR obligations of people who declare it. There was a very important suggestion on verification of claims. So we have recognized that. Our EPR guidelines also talk about verifying the claims. And if anybody misses on those verifications, there are actions, precipitative actions, which will then follow under the law, which would be taken. There was, of course, there was talking about the labeling mechanism, which is right. And of course, the triangle which you see and the numbers inside are basically resin identification codes. They do not actually mean that anything we can recycle. An important thing which of course was highlighted also, and I have noted also, involvement of informal sector versus formalization of informal sector. Ma'am, we would definitely like to hear more on that, how we are trying to do it. On the ban of MLPs, of course, I'll not like to respond. I would rather like to hear what
you like you to respond.
Well, of course. So if
And I would like you to ban them.
okay, so on the ban of MLPs, I tell you, it is more or less driven by the consumers. And how? Of course, 2018 amendment, when it was done, I was not there. But that doesn't mean that there would have been any much difference if I was there or not there. But the issue at hand is, as a society, what we choose. Now, what is happening is, let us look at what the West is doing. The West is basically saying, now what does MLP does is, it can provide you properties in a very thin layer by using multiple polymers. So if you remove multiple polymers and you make monopolymers, what you will basically have to do is you'll have to increase the thickness. So that is definitely an approach we can look at. It is also still being an evolving subject. Of course, in Europe, they are trying to make sachets and pouches of monopolymers to get the same property. But of course, important thing we have to recognize is, do we actually require that much amount of ease of use? So as I told, if we can remove the imperfections of the market and allow the consumers, which according to that questionnaire want to do away with excess of packaging, I think so time will definitely come when the PIBOs will start to respond on that. So that is what our policy approach is. We have banned plastics, which we can't manage. Whatever can be managed is supposed to be managed now through EPR. The EPR we consider is as a mechanism to unlock, the potential of how much we can recycle. Not to say recycling is the answer. I'm not going into the details of what kind of recycling, but yes, it is. We would definitely like to hear all stakeholders on how things can be improved. Our major focus now is to allow transparency to be there so that all the stakeholders can respond in a manner they choose to, and then we as a government respond and the industry responds. In the end, I would conclude by what our secretary said, because that's a gospel for me. We have to follow the whole society. Thank you very much.
That is very well said. Both you and Siddharth have laid out the situation very well. I'm a little reluctant, Atin, if you forgive me, to open it out, because I have a feeling we'll have very rich individual discussions, and each one of these issues are going to be discussed in the next session. If you look at the next session, we will have Swati talk to us about the petrochemical, but then we also have Saloni talking about recycling and the reforms, and picking up from what Amit has said. We have Nandini talking about the India Plastic Pact and the whole issue of the IDOs, which is really requiring us to understand further what's happening there again. Then the gap in policy in practice, with Dharmesh help us to understand. Compostable and biodegradable plastics, an issue that has come up, and Siddharth has put that on the table, which Mayur Jainji will help us to understand. Then the whole issue of informal and plastic waste management point that you highlighted. We have Harsha from SWAT. We also have a whole report on informal sector in waste management, which you should take a look at. And in fact, we've been working a lot with MOUD on these issues. And then most importantly, we also have Pranchu talking about PROs, which again are part of that to understand, and then is EPR and SGP ban. So I think we have, both Atin and Siddharth have done an amazing job in bringing together all the stakeholders to talk about each one of the issues that we have flagged in the morning. I'm really reluctant to open it up right now. What I'm going to suggest is we have Keith come back, listen to individual presentations, have discussions around it, and we reserve all our really open questions for the afternoon when we have the panel discussions. And we've kept those spaces for the panel discussions, and I will try and join the panel as well, so that we can really tweak out from it what is the way ahead in each area. So Atin, please.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks, Dr. Amit Love. And thank you, Parashuran Iyer, sir. I have served under him while was working with the World Bank, and then Leela Nandan ma'am for taking out time, even though they had a very important meeting to attend, but they still came and they shared their opinion, they shared their ideas and provided their guidance and also released the report. So without wasting any further time, we'll now break for a quick tea break. It's for 15 minutes only. And the good news is that we are right on top of time till now. So I'll request all of you to stay on top of time as well and come back so that we can start exactly at 11:30 with the sector presentations. And we have our speakers sitting right in front of us. Thank you.